coming down. I never left it on the ground. I'm not coming down. I want to go higher, higher, higher than that.
Welcome back to the Business is Human podcast, where we discuss strategies to increase our VRI, value, relevance, and impact. We're here to blend meaningful work with profitable success. I'm your host, Rebecca Fleetwood Hession, here to steward what we call the age of humanity, to transform the way we work so we can transform the way that we live. As always, my friendly request, if you like what you hear, hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. And then leave a review to tell the other humans that they might like it too. Always looking to help you and connect with others. Let's get into it, shall we? I want to read you the back cover of this book. And we're going to speak to the author in the next 2 episodes. So I want to give you the backdrop of my conversation with Sarah Gormley, author of The Order of Things, a memoir about chasing joy by Sarah Gormley. Here's the back cover, which does a beautiful job of illustrating what this book is about. Sometimes nothing is more unexpected than joy. What happens when a marketing executive leaves San Francisco to care for her dying mother on their family farm in Ohio? A Hallmark heroine would fall in love with her high school sweetheart during a snowstorm. But this is no Hallmark movie. Sarah Gormley spent most of her life trying to outrun the persistent self-loathing that plagued her from childhood, convinced that self-worth was something she had to earn by doing rather than being. When she returned to Salt Creek Farm at age 45, Gormley had no idea that detaching from the success she believed defined her, untangling the complicated relationship with her mother, and continuing the hard work of therapy would lead to a wildly transformed life. Told with exceptional candor and humor, The Order of Things is a story about how one woman learned to let go of the patterns of her past to create a future she never imagined. Ultimately, Gormley's book is about hope, with a powerful message that will inspire you to think about the possibility of change in your own life. I feel like these next 2 episodes need a little disclaimer from me and my excitement about this interview and these episodes, because, you know, the title of this podcast is Business is Human. And just to review, the business needs to control, measure, optimize. It's about time. It's about money, goals, systems, processes, all important parts of business. But our human needs are personal, emotional, and social. And the way that we connect and interact with one another is largely through the way we share our stories, the way that we connect with one another. And I believe that the more that we honor our human needs and our storytelling and our vulnerability and empathy and humility with one another, the better business results that we'll get, the better society that we'll build. I just know that it's better. So the guests that I asked to come on are largely talking about their human stories. If you've been following me for a while, I run an experience in Indianapolis where I live called Rise and Thrive. And it's a 7-month experience for just 7 women leaders in the area. But it culminates into this big event that I throw and invite hundreds of people in. And those 7 women get on stage and tell a 7-minute TED-like talk about their human story. And I help them craft the story. I help them prepare to stand on stage and tell it, but I don't script it. It's not about their achievements. It's not about their resume. It's their story, whatever they want to stand on stage and tell, what has bubbled up that they think is important for them to share. And the reason that I put that event as the capstone of this experience is I believe wholeheartedly that when we courageously stand tall in our stories and share them with the world or each other in some way, that we give others permission, courage, whatever they need for them to then stand tall in their own stories. And
I've seen it take place year over year over year, that the audience members of this event glean more about their own self-reflection and their own story than even what they learn or what they experience from the person's story on stage. It's how they're able to listen to that person's story, watch that person's story, and then have it just steep into their heart emotionally to cause some reflection and cause them to think about how that connects to their story. And I tell you all of that because I was introduced to this next guest by a woman here in Indianapolis who we've just barely met and known each other. We've had one Zoom call, but again, we had some things in common. We shared a great experience together. And when her friend, our guest today, Sarah Gormley, wrote this book, she reached out to me and she said, I think you're really going to like Sarah and you're really going to like this book. And I'd love to send you an advanced copy of this book. And I said, absolutely. Anytime somebody says, I think this is for you, you're like, okay, let's do it. And so Sarah and I connected and she sent me this book and it's called The Order of Things, a memoir about chasing joy. This interview now is going to be 2 episodes because I basically logged on to our interview and just geeked out and started just talking, not interviewing. I just start talking because this book had such a personal, emotional connection for me that I just couldn't wait to share how it impacted me and why I think it's important. And so it really is less of an interview in the first episode and more of me just emotionally responding to this book. And so in the next episode, I actually get into the interview and let her talk a whole lot more. And in this episode, it's mostly me just bubbling over with emotion and excitement about this book. So I didn't want to just cut it out. I think it's an important part of the learning about business is human, that when we connect with one another in this way, we create that kind of excitement. And I believe that that is a lesson for leaders, a lesson for what we bring energetically into our work every day. And so I wanted you to hear just how excited I am about this book. And then next week, we'll do a more of a real podcast interview. But I think this would be really cool if you get just as excited about this book just from my excitement. And you go to Amazon and you order it. Again, it's called The Order of Things, a memoir about chasing joy by Sarah Gormley. And then you'll have the context of the excitement when we get to the real interview next week. So without any more explanation, let's get into it.
I read it in one sitting.
You are not the first person to say that. That makes me really happy.
Yeah. And as an author, what that says to me and others that have had that experience with books is relatability. You're in the story when you're reading this book because there's so much familiarity and relatability about your story primarily, but also the way that you write about it so comfortably. It allowed us as readers to settle in and just feel. Mm-hmm. Which, especially for us high achievers who, for God's sakes, just read mostly fucking self-help stuff and we're always just trying to fucking learn something. Yeah. It was just like me and my friends who've been over it for a minute just sat down and had some coffee or wine or tequila and just told the real story about what is and what isn't and what should be.
Well, thank you.
It sat with me for a long time because I think when we read stories like this, or we just have coffee with a friend, that our stories are so weirdly aligned and similar, that it does cause that reflection time that we are all privy to. And especially high achievers, we tend to put steroids on it and think, well, if I could go back here's what I would have done differently, and here's what I wish. And that's just the devil, because he's the only one that wants us to live in the past, because we have no power over the past. So then I had to kind of have a talk with myself and say, no, we don't live in the past. There's so many things about our stories that if I knew then what I know now, damn it.
But if we hadn't done that, we probably wouldn't be here in the same way.
Yeah.
And I think that's just life. Somebody asked me a question, a journalist who asked me really insightful questions. And one of the questions was about the writing process and reflecting and kind of me admitting and getting a little emotional. Like, well, yeah, like, I wonder if I had gotten the help I needed sooner, what my life might have looked like. But bottom line, I got the help finally and sort of changed the trajectory of my life. I guess I'm crying because it is a hard lot to look back. And it's not even a regret. It's just sort of it's very normal to be like, well, I wonder if. It's not very useful unless we learn something.
We wouldn't have this, and we wouldn't have how much I know this is going to help others not feel alone and help others be inspired to know that all of us, we're in a similar age. I love you. All of us were taught and told and scripted to prove yourself and work harder. And if we take care of the business, it will take care of you. And those are literally the root cause of burnout from the very first study in 1974. And when I saw that, I was like, I was told that's what success is. And so all of us were told this thing that made sense to us at the time. But because of that, now we're waking up into this new way of living and thinking, oh, God, thank God that's not all there is, because that was just kind of awful. There's so many of us that are supposed to be art gallery owners and authors and bakery owners, whatever else is on your heart, that while you were sitting in that meeting with that asshole again that you've got to meet with to get your paycheck, and you leave the meeting and you go, I just really want to run a bakery in New Jersey, and that my mom's going to be mad if I wasted all of my college degree and all, like, am I crazy? No, love, you're not crazy. Go run the bakery. Go do whatever's in here.
It's super difficult for so many people, especially women. And it's like, we're afraid to even admit that we're unhappy or dissatisfied or our jobs are not fulfilling. That's a slippery slope. But it's like, just to admit that there's anything amiss for a certain type of overachieving women is so uncomfortable. And I've said to you and others, this is not a self-help book because it's just my story. But if it hits people or it's a message that, like, yeah, it's messy and it's okay to say, wait, maybe I shouldn't be doing that thing or this thing, or I should try something else and maybe I'll fail. I don't know. If it helps one person reevaluate, I will feel terrific.
Yeah. That's what I had to get to when I wrote mine too, because it felt like too much pressure to be more than that to people. But there were two paths I want to go down based on what you said. The first one is, do you think that we feel that sense of loyalty and responsibility to these careers that we've built because the message has been that we've had to overcome and earn this place in business and society to be respected for that? And so once we get there and it doesn't feel great, we feel like we got to stay there for that reason.
Well, there are two things. One, I think, is universal. The second one is very personal that I try to explore in the book. The first one is freaking money, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really hard to let go of some salaries. And I looked around at peers and friends at Adobe and I saw what was happening. And it's as excruciating as it was at times. They're like, I can put up with this for 3 more years because then I can retire and my kids can go to college.
The golden handcuffs is a real
deal. It is
deal.
a real thing. And there are times that I'm like, I wish I had stayed in for 4 or 5 more years. But so there's that. Okay. And then the personal perspective, which was what I kept chasing for so long, is that I thought if I got the right high-powered, high-titled, high-salaried, successful job, I would feel better about myself. There was no job that could do that. There was no boyfriend who could do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was my issue. It was scary to walk away from the earning potential. So yeah, I think it's two things. And I think it's probably a little bit different, but I think especially for overachieving women, I think it's probably some sort of a combination of both of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's upsetting, it's unnecessary.
Yeah. The identity crisis that we have in career has now become a big part of the book I'm writing now. So I started writing this book about redefining success, especially after 2020, because many of us have had kind of awakenings. Mine came actually just before it. And as I dug into it from a nervous system perspective, from a spiritual Bible perspective, from interviewing now thousands of people, identity is at the root of really the battle of good and evil. Devil wants to steal your identity. God wants you to be in him. And whether you believe in that stuff or not, from a nervous system perspective, identity is at the root of all of these things. And when we tie it so closely to our role in our career and our paycheck and granite countertops in the right neighborhood and all of those other things outside of our spirit and our soul, man, we can get thrown around hard.
And it's self-perpetuating because you think it's just the next thing. It's right around the corner, right? Then it's going to settle into it. And I was so terrified to not have a big job. I honestly was like, I don't know that I will talk about. And my friends, who are the best, were like, hey, Gorms, that's our least favorite thing about you.
I love that part of the book. You're annoying because you're so work related is kind of what their message was.
This, obsessively on your phone and on a meeting and late for things. And I was like, oh, okay.
But that was one of the connections I made so tightly with your story. Is I remember the first day of my freedom from my corporate job that I chose to leave and gave a 6-month notice because I wanted to do it, but I was also scared to death to do it, so I gave myself a long runway. But that first night, and I'm home alone, I'm single, my kids are adults, and I'm sitting in this big house by myself. And now I don't have my title or my sexy company name, Franklin Covey. People thought that was a cool place to work, just like Adobe, right? It's it was a calling card. And I sat at my counter with my big glass of wine and just had a pity party and said to myself, how will I introduce myself tomorrow? That was a real question on my mind. And it was haunting for a minute and a half until I had a talk with myself and said, oh no, we're not, this path is going to kill, you can't go down this path. You got to stay focused on what we're building here, or this will destroy you, because it's hard to make that shift.
It really is. And it took, I don't know about you, it took almost a year or 18 months, I used to say, to kind of get it off of me, to get the corporate mindset, dreaming about work and meetings and waking up and thinking, well, I had to check in with my assistant. I mean, the whole thing. And it's like, wow, it was a job.
I wake up in the middle of the night with those kind of PTSD. Am I late? Do I have a proposal that's due? Am I in the wrong city? Did I prepare the right PowerPoint? Wake up in the middle of the night yes. And it took me even longer to learn how to have conversations with real words instead of corporate speak.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Yeah. I mean, it's a very real thing and cycle and a detriment to so many amazing people. And I feel really lucky. And I hate to say escape, because here's the thing. I don't know what it would be like to have a corporate job and not have my identity inappropriately linked to it. I don't know what I'd be like if I went back into corporate life today.
And did it differently.
My guess is I'd be much more grounded, set more boundaries, call bullshit more often, but I'm not willing to go back just to test it. So my goal is...
I'm unemployable at this point.
I don't think I can have a boss at this point.
Yeah, same. But I don't think that everybody is meant to. I know I started with a lot of hyperbole about everybody should go start a bakery in New Jersey, but I don't think that everybody is. I don't think God designed everybody to go do something entrepreneurially.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are people that are gifted and their place in the world is to run businesses and be in vice president roles.
Yeah.
And my hope is through these conversations in your book, they'll do it with a stronger sense of boundaries and self and not let it skew their soul.
Yes. And I think that it's certainly, especially like I'll use big tech, it's the excitement, the thrill, the pursuit, all the big sporting analogies and winning. And, there are plenty of people that love that and do find it very fulfilling. So I'm just not one of them. And again, also with the emotional work I was doing and needed to do. So it's very unique. I've just had too many conversations with too many women, especially, that relate 100%. I wish there was some paradigm or realm in which it was more expected that you would ask yourself the hard questions, try to find some options, but I don't have all the answers. So I just wrote my story.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I believe we all need is each other's stories, because stories are what were created for us to connect and communicate, from Walls of Caves to your book today. And when we are able to vulnerably share our story, it allows us to do the self-reflection without feeling like we need to copy your story or learn from the self-help manual, but just to reflect. And I believe the more people that courageously put their stories into the world through podcasts and writing books and doing presentations, the more healing that brings to us in a way that is personal to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that. And I've said in a previous conversation, for me, what helped me immensely, and I would not have been able to change my life in the way I did without therapy. For some people, I think it's a life coach or a career coach. It might even be the friend you have that you trust who tells you point blank, look, girl, you're a little screwed up. You got to do something, right? So whatever the source is that becomes the catalyst, you'll find it when you're ready.
I'm not coming down. I never liked it on the ground. I'm not coming down.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I would love it if you would go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. And then you can go to RebeccaFleetwoodHession.com and join the Badass Women's Council. And if you really want to take a deeper dive, join the movement of 1,000 thriving women. There's amazing Thrive tools there for you today. Love you, mean it.
And I'm not coming down.
Hey y'all, fun fact, if you like the music for the podcast, that is actually my son, Cameron Hession. And I would love it if you would go to Spotify and iTunes and follow him and download some of his other music. My personal favorite is TV Land.